Watoto VP. That is Kiswahili for how are the children. One minute. Oh, no, 6 o'clock now. We'll give Dr. Michael Blanchard another few seconds. And all right, there we go.
There he is.
There he is.
Hey,
Okay.
Doc, I've been out of commission, Brother Cleet, for like almost a year, man. I've been on hiatus. Dr. Dr. Wallace will tell you so. I'm having some technical challenges here. I got to get back into it, man.
That's all right. We all have technical challenges because the technology keeps changing and we got to keep
Yeah.
updating ourselves and all of that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Welcome to our live broadcast. I'm your host, Dr. Cleet Ladd. I am a retired language arts and social studies teacher and public school principal. I am currently an associate professor with the University of Phoenix College of Education. I am also CEO of Mail Incorporated Rites of Passage Initiative and co-director of engagement and community outreach for Indiana Council on Educating Students of Color. The mission of our show is to connect local, state, national, and international leaders with you, the listener, to discuss education, equity, and its many intersections. I always begin by saying Watoto VP. Watoto VP is Kiswahili for how are the children. And our children, some are well, some are not well. So today we're having a woke conversation. With us live are my dear friend, Dr. Michael Blanchard, who is a former IMPD officer for our local connection. Dr. Blanchard is a passionate advocate for Black liberation. He's a strong believer in the power of education and community to create change. He is committed to using his voice and platform to raise awareness about the challenges facing Black people in America. Dr. Blanchard is a thought-provoking and insightful writer. His work is both challenging and inspiring. He has a valuable voice in the fight for Black liberation. Here are some of Dr. Blanchard's accomplishments. He's author of several books, including The Black Book of Lamentations and a community research guide to students' persistence. He is co-host and co-producer of the podcast, The Teachers. He's a graduate of Indiana Wesleyan University and Indiana University Bloomington. He holds a doctorate in education from the University of New England. He has taught at the college and high school levels, worked in the field of security, education, and law enforcement. He is a passionate advocate for Black liberation, a strong believer in the power of education and community to create change, committed to using his voice and platform to raise awareness about the challenges facing Black people in America. He is also a thought-provoking and insightful writer and a valuable voice in the fight for Black liberation. In addition to his work as an author, educator, and researcher, Dr. Blanchard is also a frequent speaker at conferences and events on the topic of Black liberation. He's a regular contributor to several online and print publications. He is a passionate advocate for social justice and equality and equity for all people. Dr. Blanchard is a respected and influential figure in the Black community. His work has had a significant impact on the fight for Black liberation. He is a powerful voice for change, and he is committed to using his platform to make a difference in the world. Dr. Blanchard is, his most recent work, the Black Book of Limitations, was published in 2021, a community research guide to students' persistence in 2022. Our current security protocols, the best use of funds in public schools, 2021, the Teachers Podcast, 2021 to present, and Teachers Music Video and Track. Dr. Blanchard is a prolific writer and researcher. He is constantly working on new projects, and he is always looking for ways to use his voice to make a difference in the world. He is a valuable asset to the Black community, and he is a powerful force for change. Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Blanchard.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brother Cleet.
And also, we have another outstanding guest. Dr. Rick Wallace holds dual doctorate degrees in theology and psychology. He is recognized internationally for his work in performance psychology and trauma healing with clients in Europe, Africa, Australia, Canada, and the Caribbean. In addition to his academic successes, Dr. Wallace has experienced a great deal of business success over the past 35 years. He has founded, launched, and brought more than 47 companies to profitability. He's the current founder and CEO of Rick Wallace Enterprises, which includes subsidiaries like the Visionetics Institute, Odyssey Media Group and Publishing, Master Fitness 21, the Financial Brain Trust, Myriad Business Solutions, and more. In addition to his work through the Odyssey Project, Dr. Wallace has contributed to many charitable endeavors. His passion for saving young Black boys is revealed in the Black Men Lead Rite of Passage Initiative, a program created to fill the gap of missing fathers in Black communities. Black Men Lead is designed to effectively and appropriately racially socialize young Black boys, reducing their proclivity toward violence, lower dropout rates and incarceration, and increasing their chances of success in society. He is a leader in research surrounding the enigmatic issues plaguing the Black community and continues to be an international leader in healing trauma. Dr. Wallace is a leading mind and voice regarding multi-generational trauma, epigenetics, and complex trauma. Dr. Wallace is also an author and has published 26 books, including his latest work, Transcendent, the remarkable ability to rise above the chaos to win in life, The War on Black Wealth, Academic Apartheid, Critical Mass, the phenomenon of next level living, Born in Captivity, Psychopathology and as a Legacy of Slavery, The Undoing of the African American Mind, and the Miseducation of Black Youth in America. He has written and published thousands of scholarly and prose articles and papers, with the overwhelmingly majority of his work surrounding the enigmatic issues plaguing Blacks, the inner city communities on every level. Papers that he has published include Special Education on the Mechanism for Miseducation of African Youth, Racial Trauma in African Americans, Epigenetics in Psychology, the Genetic Intergenerational Transmission of Trauma in African Americans, and Collective Cognitive Bias Reality Syndrome, just to name a few. Dr. Wallace is also a powerful and electrifying public speaker who speaks to various types and sizes of audiences on several subjects. He also functions as a personal life enhancement advisor, life strategist, consultant, and counselor. Welcome to join us, Dr. Rick Wallace. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So let's kind of just jump in. I want to kind of ask Dr. Wallace a couple of questions to get us started. And can you explain some of the psychological trauma impacting Black students' test scores, academic and social success?
Well, when we talk about Black students, we have to talk about initially cultural influences. And I think one of the things that we fail in this particular educational structure is understanding the differences in culture. When you have a teacher population in K through 12 that is predominantly white, middle-aged female, especially with young Black boys, what you're going to encounter is an indifference that is apathetic by the teacher. And there's a disproportionality of special education referrals that ultimately end up in alienation of the child. We hear all the time about the school to prison pipeline. This is one of the ways it's initiated, through the alienation of African-American males. I mean, as early as 5 years old, these young boys are going to be referred for special education because they don't sit still, because they talk out of turn, because they do all things that 5-year-olds do, but they're probably going to do it in a more amplified manner, which can be directly linked to what's going on at home. I just did in February a workshop on epigenetics and adverse childhood experiences and that impact children, and it's disproportionately impacting African Americans. And so when you take that and you couple it with a situation where you're putting a child in an environment, asking them to do something that is biologically and neurologically out of turn, be still for an hour, hold your volume down for an hour. That's not how children that age learn. But you're asking him to do it without any consideration to what's going on in the home. So when you start talking about trauma, there are probably different types of trauma happening in home, because we're still living trauma, because we haven't dealt with the generational trauma. So even when we think we're parenting well and we got a good environment, there's probably trauma. And so then he takes that to school, and he's in a culture now that he's not familiar with, because the culture wasn't created for him. So he's out of place, he's agitated. And the same thing with our young daughters, which go into a world where they are now challenged on everything from their beauty to their class, to how they carry themselves, to everything down to vernacular. And so you talk about trauma, I could go on for days talking about different things, but the biggest thing I see in trauma, and it probably wouldn't even on a regular scale be associated with academia, but the biggest educational issue I see with trauma is identity. When you walk off into a situation where you're not represented properly, the optics don't represent you, and then you're expected to acclimate to it. The acclimation, if you're not careful, the acclimation will actually lead you to abandonment of self. And in doing so, now you're dealing with self-esteem issues, self-confidence issues, and on and on. I hope that gave you.
That's a beautiful and very enlightening explanation. I'll give you an example. About 2 months ago, I did a presentation at Decatur Central High School, which has bussed in, over the years had bussed in some Black students. And I was talking about African-American heroes and sheroes, especially African-American women heroes. And I told the teachers I wanted them to watch the white males' response to learning about Black female heroes. And the teachers noticed that the white males were not paying attention, were talking, were interrupting, and were playing and tagging with each other. And I told them, I said, this is, because this is not interested in them. They don't see themselves. When the white males don't see themselves, they disconnect. And this is the same thing that happens when Black males and Black females don't see themselves. And so I think you kind of alluded to that when you're talking about identity. So thank you very much. Dr. Michael Blanchard, I know that you kind of see that there's a connection and a disconnection between scholars and grassroots activists regarding schools not serving Black students and helping Black students pass state assessments and successfully navigating the current educational landscape. Can you kind of talk about that connection and disconnection, how we can kind of bridge this gap so our students can work and be successful?
Yeah, I think both scholars and grassroots activists agree that schools are not doing enough to serve our kids. And I think, you know, it points to the fact that Black students are disproportionately likely to enroll in low performing schools and to be suspended and to be expelled and to be dropouts. So we're all in agreement to that. But the disconnect, that's the connection, you know. The disconnect is, what do we do about it? You know, because scholars tend to focus on structural factors that contribute to educational disparities faced by Black students. Grassroots people focus on the everyday experiences of Black students. And so we need to have the right people dealing with our kids. You know, we all talk about wraparound services. Dr. Wallace and I talk about wraparound services. You and I talk about wraparound services. We have, I really honestly believe we have the necessary grassroots people and scholars to actually work together to deal with these problems in our schools, increasing violence, increasing bomb threats by students, increasing violence with students calling schools and say they're going to shoot it up. You know, I work down here in Florida, as you know, in the 6th largest school district. And one of the things that I noticed down here when I first started working here in 2019 that was different about Indianapolis and South Bend, where I'm from, I could not believe the number of kids that are Baker acted. And, you know, Baker acted means when you're taken in for mental health evaluation. I mean, literally every day, Dr. Cleet, you know, to see that there are at least 5 to 10 a day. Those types of things I didn't see when I lived in Indianapolis for 15 years. I didn't see, I don't know whether you saw it, but I don't think we had that type of a mental health crisis in Indiana. And I still don't think it's that high now. You know, but down here in South Florida, there's some kind of dynamic going on where that is happening. And I don't know how the rest of the country pairs out in that, but those are the type of things that we have to deal with and get the right people into our schools. And it's very difficult for people like you and Dr. Rick Wallace that's on our program, and even you know, Sister Latava. You know, she has very good programs that could actually help our young people navigate the school system that's needed. But unfortunately, it's very difficult for them to get in as vendors in major school district. But they have the answers. It's just a matter of them being given the opportunity.
Yeah, one of the vendors we've been blessed is with the Indiana Council on Educating Students of Color, but it's in an after-school program. And so it focuses on reading, you know, helping the literacy part about reading, and then the test part. But I want to kind of pose this question to you, because to both of you, because from my experience, I've seen students bring trauma from home and not care about the test. And then I've also seen them have test anxiety because the teachers, all you got, you know, they're training for the test and they're not really learning the curriculum or the content.
Right, you're talking about the dynamic of teaching to the test rather than making sure the student actually grasps the knowledge. Yes. And that is a major problem, teaching to the test. And Dr. Rick can speak to this a lot. You know, everything is tied to that test, not only for the student, but it's also tied to the teacher, whether the teacher is effective or not. So, you know, we got to get away from teaching to the test, and we have to get in a position to where we can actually measure whether the kid is educated, you know, and we can talk about what education means. Is it simply passing a test, or is it the mastering of that knowledge? You know, it's two different things.
Wow. Dr. Rick.
I agree 100% with Dr. Blanchard on that. I think one of the things that I think we have to center around, when I wrote The Miseducation of Black Youth, which was my 16th book, one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to define education in the sense of what it means to advance one or to advance a group of people. And education has to be seen as more than simply the accumulation or the acquisition of academic skill sets. To me, education begins with the centering of identity. If a kid doesn't know who he is, you can give him all the skills in the world and he'll still be misled, misguided, exploited, mishandled, and misused. So I define education as the empowerment and preparation of youth to develop a capacity to go out into the world as adults and not only compete, but win. And so it starts with identity. It starts with a sense of self. Without everything you do is based on your self-concept, your self-image. And if you go out into a situation where we haven't properly socialized the child doesn't know who he is, a young Black male is still searching for self. What happens is he's going to get into an environment where he's not recognized, where he's not acknowledged, where he's marginalized. And in order to be accepted, he's either going to fight to be accepted, which means sets down who he really thinks he is because he doesn't look or feel or fit in, but he wants to. Everybody wants to be accepted. It's a natural social push and desire within our makeup. But what happens is when you put him in an environment where the vast majority of the people who are going to be judging him and secondary label givers next to his parents, they're going to have an influence. So if he doesn't know before he leaves home who he is, he's going to struggle. Why? Because the vast majority of stimuli that he's going to come in contact with isn't going to support who he is at home or who he sees or desires or wants to be early in life. And then when he gets to the age of 13, 14, and 15, then there comes another problem. And we see this in the outline of the dropout rate, which leads to a higher incarceration rate. Statistics tell me that if you drop out of high school before getting a diploma, you're 4 to 5 times more likely to become incarcerated. Well, right around the time these dropouts are happening, Black males are going through what all males go through, and that is the transition out of puberty into adolescence and to a sense of natural self-discovery. At that age, every male, regardless of race, is searching for who they are in their faith, in their career aspirations, in how they carry themselves as a man, how manhood is defined, which is a struggle in the Black community because we don't have a universal designation of what manhood is. That's why I created Black Men League, to create that. But the more he struggles with that, the more disruptive he becomes because he's fighting. He's fighting, and when he doesn't know what he's fighting, he fights everything. And so then you end up with hyperviolence, you end up with criminal mentality or criminal activity, a bunch of other things that obviously lead him down the wrong path. And so self-discovery is so important, and it needs to be initiated early on. So again, like Dr. Blanchard said, I think all agree that there's a problem. Where the disconnect comes in is on what we should do about it and what do we define of it. And again, I agree 100% that we've got to move away from universal ideas as far as tests are concerned. These standardized tests, these ideas of teaching toward a test, I think we need to spend more time on identifying gifts, identifying strengths, intellectual strengths, natural artistic gifts, all the things that people can use in this world to create value and space for themselves. I think those are things that we need to do. It's things that it's a universal thing. Everybody's taught to the same standard when everybody's not the same. And so and that's in learning and that's in performance as well. I think everybody in having dealt with so many people over the course of my life and my career, I tell people all the time, I think everybody has a gift. I've dealt with people with learning disorders, oppositional defiant disorder, low IQs, Down syndrome, ADHD, and everything else. And I've yet to meet a person without a gift. The problem is very few of the situations that we look at when we talk about education is searching out a gift. It's saying, this is what we're going to train you to do. So you fit into the system. And I think we've got to start teaching and training away from system and toward gift.
Wow, yeah. My experience as an educator, I was with the alternative education department for about 5 years with IPS, and it started out as focusing on how students learn and students' interests and passions and gifts and talents. It ended up becoming a penal part of a penal system, where if a student wasn't performing in the regular school, they were sentenced to alternative school. And so my students started out, it was about 50-50 racially and 50% gender. But when they changed it to a penal system, it became about 90% Black male, you know. And so one of the things that we learned about it, and I want you guys to talk more about this as well, is that when you talk about identity, and the movies and the media shows pimps, hustlers, athletes, but not engineers, not pilots, you know. And so then particularly the Black male, and then for the Black female, maids, prostitutes, you know, things like that. Those are the images that they push in front, and they still do that. And I want you to kind of, both of you, just to jump in, kind of explain how those images help distort what a person can become, or as they see it, their purposes in life.
Dr. Blanchard, you want to go first?
Well, the only thing I'll say about it is that, you know, Dr. Rick has educated me about the importance of socialization. And it's just amazing that we don't have socialization as part of the school curriculum because our students are not getting it, you know, they're not getting it at home. You know, we tried the rites of passage programs, you know, those were real big in the last 20, 30 years to try to attempt to do that. And then all of a sudden, you also have to have the right people teaching that socialization. So to teaching the kids their identity, because many of us as adults, we don't have a good sense of self and identity ourselves. So, you know, many of us just learned over the last 30 years, you know. I can remember living in Indianapolis with you, Brother Cleet, and coming out of college at Indiana University and having no sense of self, having no sense of identity. And living in Indianapolis was fertile ground for me, learning from brothers like you and several other brothers, you know, going to Black bookstores and seeking it out, you know, coming out of Indiana University and saying, hey, I have a degree, but I don't know anything about myself. So I started that journey, you know, way back in 1989 when I joined the Indianapolis Police Department. I would go to Black bookstores, you know, during the time I was patrolling and buy books and read in my spare time. And so it's interesting that you can go through K through 12 and also 4 years of education and do not have a sense of identity. So it's very important. You know, Dr. Rick can probably speak more eloquently than I can on it, but that's just my own personal experience. I mean, I knew nothing about myself. You know, when I came out of South Bend School, community schools, and went on to Indiana University, man, all I thought, you know, I got that you had slavery and you had the civil rights movement. That was the gist of what I got, you know. And it seems like we're going back to that, you know, especially down here in Florida where I'm at. We're going back to that. That's the only thing they want to talk about. And then we can't mention anything that hurts folks' feelings either. You know, we can't do that either. So,
well, what I want to do is give a real quick snapshot of what we're talking about when we say socialization. So, for clarity, every parent, regardless of race, socializes their kid, regardless of race. Socialization is a sense of awareness. This is who you are. This is what you can do. This is what you can't do. This is socially acceptable. This is not socially acceptable. You don't go in public and do this. You don't go, when you go out, you say, yes, sir, no, ma'am. You shake someone's hands. You look in them in the eye, all that. Then you tell them you're smart, you're beautiful, you're handsome, you can do anything. All that's socialization. But we've all heard the term, especially Blacks, we've heard the term racial socialization. So I'm often asked, what's the difference between socialization and racial socialization? Well, socialization, every parent does. Racial socialization is the double down because a Black parent understands the vast majority of stuff I just taught you about yourself that's positive, you're going to go out in the world and immediately meet opposing views. And so I've got to double down. So one of the things when I think about racial socialization that I experience as myself is constantly being told as a young youth that you're going to have to be 2 to 3 times better than the average white person to get the same footing that they get. And then it would be followed with, but son, you're that good that you can do whatever they can do, and you can do it 3 times better because you're going to have to. So it went out, and I went out with an understanding that life isn't fair. And that's one of the first things that I had to gain a grasp. It's not about how fair life is, it's about what you take and what you do with what you have. So that's the first step of it, is this idea of, first of all, preparing children to go out into a world that all these views are opposing. Now let's get to the question you ask about the imagery. The media controls the imagery, and the media is controlled predominantly by 6 major figures in the world, 13,000 plus media outlets predominantly owned by 6 people. We won't call them what they are because I'm trying to keep you from getting kicked off and me from getting banned and a whole bunch of other stuff, but we all know. So these 6 people control the narrative because the media controls the narrative. There's a book written in 1933 by a guy by the name of Edward Bernays, who is the father of PR. And it's literally from Bernays' teachings that Hitler took the book of propaganda and created the movement that allowed him to do what he did and have the backing of the predominance of German citizens, because that's the power of propaganda. A Black gentleman wrote a book called Brainwash, Tom Burrell. He's the CEO emeritus of the largest Black-owned media company, Black-owned PR firm, excuse me. And he talks about how the media is used to create a negative image. I'll give you a prime example. Take 6 kids, 3 white kids, 3 Black kids, 16 years old. They go to the mall, they shoplift. When they do the news report for the white kids, they're in their school picture. They do the image of the Black kids, they get their mugshot. And this is consistently sending an image. Everything that you see in the imagery is what? Criminalizing the Black male image. Emasculate, or the flip side is the emasculation. It's either highly feminizing the Black male image or criminalizing the Black male image. And so what's so crazy about it, it's not just a little white old lady walking down the parking lot when you're walking towards the mall that gets all the way to the side. It's the Black woman too, because she's bought into it. She's more afraid of you, even though the statistic says she's probably more of a threat with a white male than she is a Black male. The imagery says otherwise. So when they see, and here's the problem. So when they see a Black male shot down unarmed by a police officer, the natural neurological processing of the brain, the subconscious says they probably did something to deserve it, even though they're not armed. And then Norm Stamper, who is a former police chief for San Diego and Seattle, if I'm not mistaken, wrote a book called Breaking Rank. And he broke rank. When I tell you, bro, he told everything. One of the things he wrote in that book, which was pretty interesting to me, is he said that white cops, while they will not admit it, have a natural innate fear of Black men. And the darker the man and bigger the man, the bigger the fear. And so when they say they fear for their life, it's not a cop-out. It's literally they believe that Black men are supernaturally more powerful and capable of killing them with their bare hands. And where do you think they get that imagery from? That imagery is constantly put out that we are naturally destructive, we tear up everything, when the truth of the matter is about 80% of the Black male population are almost 90% are law-abiding, but about 80% perform at a standard above what anybody could ever imagine. Matter of fact, a Pew Research finding and a Kaiser research finding, both published and held by the CDC, says that Black men are more engaged as fathers than whites or Asians. So, but that's never going to be published. It's never going to be brought to the forefront because it doesn't meet the narrative. So when you ask about this, what they see in imagery has a massive impact on what they interpret about themselves. If everything I see about myself is negative, if everything I see about the person who opposes me is positive, I literally start to believe they're better than
me. Wow, that's powerful. I'm gonna take a little break here a second just to read something about we got some summer programs coming up. We have a library and book library, book, and art event coming up tomorrow at Glendale Library. We have the parents and community are invited to hear Magistrate Jeffrey Gaither. He's of the Marion County Superior Court on Education and Law, and artistic virtuoso Angelita Hampton. Then I want to share something. I just came back from, I gave several Juneteenth presentations over the weekend. And I met with Faye Williams. Faye Williams from Galveston, Texas, who talked about her family's history with regard to Juneteenth. And we learned some things that the proclamations around Juneteenth, such as the 13th Amendment, freed all slaves, not just African, but also Chinese or Asian, also Latino. And so we tend to focus, the slavery part, freeing the slaves, is focused on Black people. And so that, you know, when Dr. Michael Blanchard talked about our history starts with slavery, you know, and that's the image that they, you know, the shackled, big Black man shackled that you talked about.
Right.
And so I was really taken aback by that, because that's what we hear all the time. And so, but you don't see the Native American or the, you know, the indigenous or the Chinese or the Latin people who were also enslaved, and they were freed by the 13th Amendment as well. And then she talked about General Order number 34, number 3. And this is from General Gordon Granger, read this in Galveston on June 19th, 1865, 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. It says, the people are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection hereto existing between them become that between employer and hired labor. The freed are advised to remain at their present homes and to work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts, and they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. This is General Order number 3. And so it talks about masters and slaves. It doesn't talk about people. It talks about statuses, you know. And so I think that when you talk about how our images and the media, they continue to not to portray us as human beings, as people, but as former slaves or people, ancestors of, descendants of enslaved people. And they never talk about our Africanness, our connection to our African continents. And so when I was listening to her talk about this, and the Galveston was called the Island of Color, and it kind of stained my wanting to celebrate Juneteenth, you know, because it doesn't talk about us as being human beings. It doesn't talk about us, you know, the media doesn't talk about our contributions to America, to, you know, becoming people, human beings, as opposed to just freed slaves. You know, you talk about that language, the propaganda language and stuff like that. So I just wanted to share that with you real quick. But now let's get back to another question. And this is kind of about I was a dean at a school, IP 69 about 7 years ago. And I kept getting these 14 Black boys were kept coming to my office almost every day, the same 14 by the same teachers. And so then I talked to the boys, you know, I had them had them draw some of their feelings, you know, and come to find out of the 14, 9 of them had fathers who were murdered. And so I want you to kind of, you know, talk about that trauma, and then not having, you know, because you know, I never met my father. My father passed when I was a teenager. And the first time I saw him was in his coffin. So I had no identity of who he was or who I could become. You talked about that. So kind of talk more about that trauma of Black children, their parents going to prison or being killed or murdered, and them not having a relationship with their parents.
Well, I think we're seeing it play out. And I'm just going to say something real briefly, Doc. I see it playing out, during the last 4 years that I've been working in the field of school security. You can't even get to the curriculum because you're having to deal with all the trauma, all the violence, all the dysfunction of the community is being brought to the school doorstep now, because we as a society, both the community, law enforcement, we've taken a position that more police is going to solve the problem, and it really isn't. If the police could solve the problem, they would have solved the problem in the neighborhood itself. And so how do we think that we can solve the problems that we're dealing with at school now with more police? It has to be more mental health, more wraparound services to provide the racial socialization that Dr. Wallace is talking about, to deal with food deprivation, to deal with all the social ills. Before we can even get to teaching the lesson plan, these teachers have to basically play social worker, police officer, mom, dad. They have to do all of those things. And I think that the other thing we haven't discussed are the lowering of teacher standards, the low number of African American teachers that we have, and the total, what I would call the total decay of public education now, in terms of, it was a time when people wanted to be teachers. Remember, back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, it was honorable to be a teacher. A lot of our biggest and brightest went into the educational profession. That's not happening anymore. When you gentlemen are around my same age. So back when I was at Indiana University in the mid 80s, about 26% of all confirmed degrees were in education. You know what it is today? It's 6%. So those are things that those are some of the things we got to look at, when we talk about we need real education reform, and nobody's talking about it in the country, the fact that we need true educational reform that actually reaches back into the community and really solves some of these problems, so that teachers are not expected to try to solve these problems at the schools.
As to the point of trauma and how that plays out, and you mentioned something that I can definitely relate to, not knowing your father. I never met my father. The first time I saw my father, I was 14 years old, and he was in a casket. Fortunately, I grew up in the home with a man. My great-grandfather, my grandmother's parents adopted me and reared me. So I had it, but there were still all these questions that came along with him not being present in my life that I had to at some point answer. But let's talk about that particular. I mentioned this earlier about the adverse childhood experiences and epigenetics, which is a major part of my research. I want to talk about 10 adverse childhood experiences that not only impact how a child performs in school, but also impacts their health, and not just on a mental level, on a physiological level throughout life. There are 10 primaries, and I've identified at least 10 others, but 10 primaries. The first one is physical abuse, the second verbal, third verbal abuse, the third sexual abuse, the fourth physical neglect, the fifth emotional neglect. Number 6 is having a parent that is addicted to a controlled substance, specifically and especially alcohol, an incarcerated family member, the disappearance of a parent through divorce, death, or abandonment, a family member diagnosed with a mental illness, and number 10, a mother who is a victim of domestic violence. Each one of those ACEs count as a point, or we refer to it as an ACE. When you reach 4 points or 4 ACEs, you are 12 times more likely at some point in your life to attempt suicide, You're 2.5 times more likely to develop certain illnesses like type 2 diabetes, 4 times more likely to develop ischemic heart disease, the #1 killer in America, 4 times more likely to develop cancer. We talk about cancer, we always talk about carcinogens, we always talk about what we're eating. The truth of the matter is when I began to study epigenetics, and I actually began to study it to delve into the question of multi-generational trauma, the transmission of trauma down generational lines, because in the 90s, they start talking about, it's been 100+ years since slavery and it's time to get over it. And so my question was, have we ever dealt with the trauma that came from 246 years of chattel slavery, 12 years of Reconstruction, 10 years of Black codes and convict leasing, 76 years of Jim Crow segregation? We're still dealing with mass incarceration, gentrification, and a bunch of other things that are still re-injury. So where did it come from? But in the process of studying epigenetics, I was introduced to the point of environmental stressors. And we come to find out that the most influential cause of disease, cancer, lupus, other diseases, environmental stress. So when these kids experience this, even after they move into adulthood, they're still genetically carrying the genetic tags or the epigenetic tags that came with the trauma that will influence how they behave. So some will become more sexually promiscuous, others will become more sexually docile or retreative. And then you'll have other type of behavior where you'll sit and say, why are they taking all these risks associated to the trauma? And then you'll look at all these actual health outcomes. And we come to find out that a significant part of our issues with health, and we're looking right now, just in the last 5 years, the life expectancy of Black men dropped 3 years. And while 3 years doesn't seem like a lot, it's huge in the statistical study of life expectancy. 3 years dropping that fast is astronomical. And it is directly associated with stress. And we have never been more stressed as Black men than we are now. And we have to understand this started as early as 3 and 4 and 5 years old. And so when we talk about the trauma, we're talking about kids who are probably coming to school traumatized, then being traumatized by the system in one way or another, and there not being an outlet for them to deal with it. So it's absolutely imperative that we address this on that level, because again, and the reason and how I got connected, I did this for the Harris County Sheriff's Office here in Houston. Harris County is the largest county and Houston is in Harris County. But and the program that brought me in was a reentry program, and we're trying to reduce recidivism. And but the point you have to understand is the impact that is experienced by the men. We talk a lot in the Black community about 1.5 million Black men missing. Well, I can tell you where 1.3 of them are at: prison. So you got 1.3, there's 1.5, know exactly where they're at. But we can't keep them out of there because they've been conditioned and institutionalized. That's the power of the subconscious that's been influenced since they were kids. They were literally primed for that. And that's, and you couple that with the trauma, and it's hard to reach. You ever looked at somebody and said, prime example, all he had to do was comply. There's instinctive behavior that goes down to the most primitive part of the brain that totally shuts down the prefrontal lobe or the prefrontal cortex, which is where all your executive function, impulse control, all that stuff that makes you make good decisions gets shut down the moment that you have that response or that reaction. And Black men almost live in it. And so what are we going to do about it? And so all these questions arise. Again, this is a topic in and of itself, but that, to answer your question as best as I could in the time allotted, we have a problem.
Wow. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Well, I'll tell you, you guys, I'm looking at some of the data as well, that the majority, recently, the Department of Justice said the majority of students who are being suspended and expelled are now Black females. And then I look at it and it says that the majority of teachers are white female, or the majority of teachers are white females in schools where a majority of students are Hispanic, Black, Asian, American Indian, Alaska Native. Um, then I have this other that says, this is from the National Bureau of Economic Research, showed that Black students who have one Black teacher in elementary school are 13% more likely to enroll in college. Those who have two Black teachers are 32% more likely to go to college. So my question to both of you is what can we do to get more talented and committed Black educators? Now I'm saying educators, not teachers, educators teaching in our public schools and in our communities.
Well, that's a tough one, man. That is a tough one, Dr. Cleet. Clearly, when we have a demographic that has such a low number of African-American teachers and educators, obviously students see people that look like them. And the teachers that are there, they have difficulty relating to each other, both the teacher and then you have bias that's going on, bias with grading and bias with just interacting and socializing with the young person, as Dr. Rick talked, alienated, and they lose interest in school. I remember even myself losing interest in school because of that, as I talked about a little bit earlier. But we have to pay teachers. First of all, we got to create a better environment for teachers to work in, because we're losing teachers by the droves. And I don't have to tell both of you how many Black teachers we've lost in the last 20 years. And right now, I talk about us being in need of reform in education. When I look at my own school district, when I look around and see all the Black teachers that are down here in Florida of retirement age, if they all decided to retire, year, you talk about a shortage. You always hear about the teacher shortage now. We would be in very dire straits. I mean, it's so bad now that you've seen programs where they're willing to hire people with no degree in teaching to teach, by allowing military or former military's families to come teach. And so we're doing things that devalue the position of a teacher, because we're lowering the standards instead of raising the standards and paying more to attract better teachers. We're actually, lowering the bar to be a teacher. Out in Nevada, you can be a substitute teacher without any college credits at all. So we have to raise the salary. We got to create a better working environment in schools, because we're just losing them by the droves. I don't have a magical solution to that, but you have to pay more. You have to pay a livable wage and salary, because, like I said earlier, 26% of all confirmed degrees 30 years ago. Now we only have 6% of confirmed education degrees in 2023. So it's a major problem that nobody's really dealing with or talking about. But there has to be a change in the conditions of teachers, and it has to be a better benefits, a better pay.
Thank you.
I concur. Having come from a high school that was literally 99.9% Black, we had almost 4,000, close to 4,000 something students when I graduated in '86, and had more than that the years before. We had 2 Latino students. Everybody else in that entire school was Black, but 95% of the teachers were Black. And they were there because they wanted to be. They was there because they saw a chance to impact us. And I look at the number of lawyers, engineers, and professionals that came out of that school during that time, and we're all still connected. We stay real closely knit, and we deal with each other. And it's like, man, we produced. And so I had read the same numbers that you talk about, and there's a direct correlation between being able to see someone like yourself in a professional, influential position. And number one is, what I can tell you is these Black teachers see something in you. I talk about I don't know if you read my whole bio, but I talk about my teachers, the influential ones throughout school that saw something in me at different stages. My elementary school teacher, Miss Francois, inflected me. I write like Miss Francois right now today because she told me nobody would ever know how intelligent I was because they couldn't understand my writing. And so she made me stay after school every day with her until I learned how to write legibly. And so I actually ended up writing to where I got teased a lot. You write like a girl. But, and then I got to middle school and Mr. Brewer demanded that we show up on time, that we do our work, that discipline was this thing. And then I got to high school and Miss Dewberry, which was turned out to be my 11th grade teacher, but found me in the 9th grade when she sat in for one of my teachers and she pulled me to the side, said, I've listened to you talk. And she said, I'm going to keep up with you. And she was the most feared person in school. Kids would get her in school. The first day they would look at their schedule and they'd be lined up outside the counselor's office crying because they didn't want her. But she saw something in me. She would tell me the word can't doesn't apply to you. And these things stick because they are authoritative figures. But if everybody that's authoritative don't look like you, first and foremost, they don't care about you the same way they care. I think Malcolm X said it best. Only a fool expects his enemy to educate his children to compete against theirs. And you have to really think about this. This is a competitive world where we're going out and we're competing for jobs, we're competing for a future. So I think that we have to start with the idea of educating outside of the system. We need to create and bring minds together to educate outside the system. We also need to start pooling our resources to create institutions for our children that we can put them in an environment where the people who are excelling look like them so that they can strive and be, because that anti-socialism thing that I talked about at the beginning is what you get when 75% of your teachers are white females. And for a male, and for a Black male, I want you to understand something that's counterproductive in a number of different ways. I'm gonna give you this example, then I'm gonna turn it back over to you. When I was 7 years old, no, I take it back, I was 8 turning 9. My grandfather, my great-grandfather went to my great-grandmother and said, I got it from here. You no longer chastise him, you no longer whip him, you no longer discipline him. Anything he does out of line, you tell me, I take care of it from here. And when I was 12, I asked him why he did that. He says, if I continue to let you be dominated by her, you will grow up as a man and be dominated by women. You won't be able to lead. You won't be able to take on your role as a man, and you won't function well. At some point, you got to learn from a man. And so he took on that role. And so now you take a Black male who is already naturally resisting a woman at a certain age. He doesn't want to be, his natural part of him doesn't want to be dominated by a woman. And then you make it a white woman on top of it. And you got all this friction, and we don't understand why it's going on. We are moving so far away from the natural order of how our men operate that we see this. And I'm glad that you pointed out the fact that the most rapidly growing population in prison right now are Black females. Why? And you're starting to see they're starting to funnel them through the school and prison pipeline. They're the most suspended right now, and all that means is that's part of the school to prison pipeline, suspension and expulsion. And so what we have to do is we have to look at how is that happening, and then we have to counter it. But in my opinion, the system is so broken now, and we're rapidly approaching a point where public education won't be what it was anyway. We're moving towards privatization of the educational system. So we've already moved to where we are in the charter school era, and the charter school era will eventually give away to complete privatization. But what happens in the charter school is they're pulling the brightest and the sharpest out of regular public schools and putting them in the charter schools because they get to hand select. And what happens to the schools after the hand-picked high performers are gone? You get low performance scores. What happens after a number of years of low performance scores? They close the school. And this is happening over and over again. And what's going to eventually happen is we're going to transition out to privatization. And what most people don't realize is while you can get arrested and ticketed for not sending your kid to school, there's no constitutional right for education.
Right.
And so we've got to be ahead of the game. There's no right to education. Then they'll penalize you for it if you don't participate. But I've worked and I've actually participated in actually homeschool some of my younger kids. And that's going to have to be another option as well. It's not easy because most parents are working.
Yeah.
But homeschool kids perform at a higher level, a much higher level than publicly educated children.
Okay, so we're about ready to close. Can both of you take about a minute to talk about, how people how can they purchase your books? How can they schedule you? How can they reach out to you to have you come and do presentations and to share your knowledge and wisdom and experience? Can both of you take a quick moment to do that? Or you can type it in the chat or something like that.
Yeah, you can reach me at drmichaelblanchard.com. All of my books are on there. The email contact is on there.
Cool.
And you can reach me at support@rickwallacephd.link. I just typed it in there, and you can get a list of the books. You can also work with my support team to set up any type of speaking engagements, workshops, conferences, anything like that. But that's the one-stop shop, the support at Rick Wallace, support@rickwallacephd.link. And that's the easiest way, rather than sharing 35 different links.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you guys taking the time and sharing your knowledge and wisdom and expertise with us. Like I said, we will. I will edit it and put it on the blog talk on the Wake Up Everybody blog talk, and I hope people will take you up and reach out to y'all and get your publications, contact you to speak and come and do presentations, because we really don't have enough qualified people that can come out, that are willing to come out and share their expertise with us. And one thing that I've learned myself is that I get more offers from outside of Indianapolis than I do locally. And I was talking to Babyface, Kenny Babyface Edmond, and he said the same thing. The Black Expo, and they reach out to him, they want to give him a little this or that. But then once he got out of here, then it took off.
No, you're right. You're right, Dr. Lee. We don't support our own, in our own communities.
Unfortunately,
that's my experience too. My hometown of South Bend, and like you said, Indianapolis with Babyface. I remember that. That him saying that Indianapolis didn't offer him the street, so he became really big.
Yeah. Well, thank you both, and you guys have a great. Oh, and tell people about the teachers, how they can access the teachers.
Oh, Doc, you want to do it or you want me to do it?
Yeah, you can reach us at www.theteachers.com. We have a bunch of about 30 previous episodes of it. You can reach it there. You can also reach us on YouTube, both the podcast as well as the Teachers soundtrack that has Dr. Rick Wallace explaining what education means before the soundtrack begins. So you can reach us there, www.theteachers.com.
Thank you both. So again, thank you, Dr. Michael Blanchard and Dr. Rick Wallace, for a great conversation and some guidance, on how to deal with this this trauma that we're experiencing and this disconnect that we're experiencing between scholars and our community leaders. So again, thank you both. And I will check in with you guys, and I will send y'all the link for the Wake Up Everybody broadcast blog talk. Thank you and have a great evening.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate you.
Talk to you later, Doc.
All right, definitely. We'll talk.